Welcome to the Deep Dive.
Great to be here.
Today we're getting into, well, a really specific and sometimes tricky part of the ancient texts. We're looking at Leviticus chapter 15.
Yes. The chapter dealing with ceremonial uncleanness, specifically from bodily discharges, is quite detailed.
Exactly. Our goal here is really to unpack what the source material actually says about these rules, the rituals, what it all meant in context.
And it's important to remember, like you said, the context. This is primarily about ritual status, not exactly modern hygiene concepts. It's about how certain physical states affected interaction within the community, especially concerning their sacred space, the tent of meeting.
Right, that's a crucial distinction. This isn't about being, physically dirty or sinful in the way we might think. It's a specific state needing specific actions to resolve.
Precisely. A state of uncleanness requiring a transition back to cleanness.
Okay, so let's start where the text does. For men, what kind of bodily discharge does it define as causing this state?
The source is pretty straightforward on this. It says, when any man has a bodily discharge, the discharge is unclean. And it clarifies this holds true whether it's, flowing freely or if it's blocked.
Just the condition itself makes him unclean.
That's the idea presented, yes.
And this uncleanness, it doesn't just stay with him, right? The text makes a big point about it spreading to objects.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
This is where you see how pervasive this state was thought to be. Anything he lies on, his bed, for instance, becomes unclean. Same for anything he sits on.
It really radiates outward through contact.
Exactly.
So what happens if someone else then, say, touches that bed or chair?
Well, the rule is very clear. Anyone touching his bed or sitting where he sat has to wash their clothes and bathe, and importantly, they stay unclean until evening.
Okay, so it's a temporary transfer but requires purification.
Right. And it extends further, too.
Like direct contact with the man.
Yes. If you touch the man himself, same deal. Wash clothes. Bathe. Unclean till evening. There's even a specific mention, if he happens to spit on someone who is clean, that person also has to wash and bathe and is unclean till evening.
Wow. Very thorough. What about things he might use, maybe while traveling or carrying items?
Good question. The source mentions that anything under him when he's riding is unclean.
Like a saddle or blanket?
Presumably, yes. And anyone who touches those specific things or even picks them up has to do the whole washing and bathing routine, remaining unclean till evening. It shows how anything in direct contact during that state carries the uncleanness.
It seems even incidental contact is covered. What about his hands?
That's another point. If the man with the discharge touches someone, but he hadn't rinsed his hands with water first.
So rinsing hands makes a difference.
Apparently so. If he touches someone without that prior rinsing, the person touched becomes unclean until evening and needs to wash and bathe. It really highlights the meticulous nature of avoiding transfer.
And there's that fascinating bit about different materials. Clay pots versus wood.
Yes. That's such an interesting detail. A clay pot he touches has to be broken, smashed, but a wooden item just needs to be rinsed with water.
What do you think that implies?
Well, it suggests they saw materials differently in terms of absorbing uncleanness. Clay, being porous, maybe was seen as permanently contaminated, while wood perhaps could be cleansed just by washing the surface. It gives you a little window into their material understanding.
Okay, so given how easily this state seems to spread, according to the text, how does the man actually get clean again? What's the process?
Right, so once the discharge itself stops, there's a set procedure. First, he has to count off 7 days.
7 days after it stops.
Correct. These 7 days are specifically for his cleansing. During this time, he washes his clothes and bathes his body in fresh or living water, as some translations put it.
So washing and waiting, is that it?
No, there's a crucial final step. On the 8th day, after the 7 days are complete, he needs to bring an offering.
An offering? What kind?
2 doves, or 2 young pigeons. He takes them to the entrance of the tent of meeting, that central sanctuary, and gives them to the priest.
And the priest does what?
The priest then performs a ritual. One bird is offered as a sin offering, and the other as a burnt offering. The text explicitly says the priest makes atonement for him before the Lord because of his discharge.
So it's physical cleansing, a waiting period, and then a specific ritual atonement.
Exactly. It connects the physical state back to the relationship with the divine.
Now, the source also talks about uncleanness from an emission of semen. Is that handled the same way?
No, it's treated quite differently. It's a much shorter period of uncleanness. An emission makes a man unclean only until evening.
Just until evening.
Yes. And the only action required is that he must bathe his whole body with water.
Simpler. What about objects like clothing?
If semen gets on any clothing or leather, that item also becomes unclean until evening, and it needs to be washed with water.
And the text also mentions sexual intercourse, right?
Yes, it addresses that specific situation. If a man and woman lie together and there's an emission of semen, then both of them become unclean until evening.
Both of them.
Both. And the requirement is the same for both. They must bathe with water. Shared contact, shared temporary uncleanness.
Okay. Let's shift then to the regulations for women. The text covers the regular monthly period.
It does, in detail. A woman's regular menstrual flow makes her impure or unclean for 7 days. That's the standard duration according to the source.
And contact during that time.
Anyone who touches her during those specific 7 days becomes unclean until evening.
And does the transfer to objects work the same way as with the man's discharge? Beds, seats?
Yes, exactly the same principle applies. Anything she lies on during her period is unclean. Anything she sits on is also unclean.
So logically, if someone else touches her bed or, say, a chair she sat on.
You guessed it. They have to wash their clothes, bathe with water, and they remain unclean until evening. The text really spells this out for both the bed and anything sat upon.
What if the source specifically mentions a man lying with her during her period?
It addresses that scenario directly. If a man lies with her and her menstrual flow touches him, he becomes unclean for a full 7 days.
7 days. Longer than just touching her.
Yes. And significantly, any bed he lies on during those 7 days also becomes unclean. It reflects that more direct contact during her time of uncleanness.
Okay. The text then describes another kind of discharge for women, one that's not the regular period.
Right. It talks about a discharge of blood that might happen for many days outside her normal period, or maybe one that continues longer than the usual 7 days, and irregular flow.
How is that situation handled? Is it different?
It's treated very similarly to the impurity of a regular period, but the duration matches the discharge. So as long as this irregular or extended discharge lasts, she is considered unclean.
The state continues as long as the flow does.
Correct. It mirrors the state of her monthly period, just potentially for a longer time.
And objects, beds, seats.
Same rules apply. Any bed she lies on or seat she sits on during this entire time is unclean. And naturally, whoever touches those things becomes unclean.
Requiring the usual washing, bathing, unclean till evening.
Exactly. Wash clothes, bathe, unclean till evening. The principles are consistent.
So how does she become clean after this kind of longer, irregular discharge stops? Is it like the regular period or more like the man's longer discharge?
It follows the pattern for the longer-term conditions. So, like the man with the chronic discharge, once she is cleansed from this irregular flow, she must count off 7 days.
Another 7-day waiting period.
Yes. After those 7 days pass, she is considered ceremonially clean again.
And I assume there's an offering on the 8th day here, too.
There is. It mirrors the man's process for cleansing from a long-term discharge. On the 8th day, she also brings 2 doves or 2 young pigeons to the priest at the entrance to the tent of meeting.
And the priest offers them.
Yes. One as a sin offering, the other as a burnt offering. The text states this is for the priest to make atonement for her before the Lord, specifically for the uncleanness related to her discharge.
Okay, we've walked through these really specific rules for men, for women, for different kinds of discharges, how it transfers. What does the source itself say is the big picture reason for all this? What's the point?
Well, the text actually gives a very explicit purpose. It says these regulations were given, through Moses and Aaron to the Israelites.
For what reason?
The core idea is stated as, you must keep the Israelites separate from things that make them unclean. Separation is key.
And the reason for that separation is pretty serious.
Extremely serious, according to the text. The consequence for not maintaining this separation is given starkly. So they will not die in their uncleanness for defiling my dwelling place, which is among them.
Wow. So failure to manage this ritual uncleanness could defile God's dwelling place, the tent of meeting, and that could be fatal.
That's the danger presented. God's presence was understood to be literally dwelling among the people in the sanctuary. So uncontrolled uncleanness wasn't just a personal issue. It was seen as a direct threat to that sacred space and therefore potentially to the whole community's relationship with God, even their survival. These rules were the prescribed way to prevent that.
That really puts the intense focus on contact and washing and waiting and offerings into perspective. It's about protecting that sacred center.
Precisely. It's about maintaining the ritual integrity needed to live with the divine presence nearby. And the scope covers all the situations we discussed: the man with a discharge, semen emissions, the woman's monthly period, irregular discharges for men or women, and even the specific case of a man lying with an unclean woman. It's a whole system.
So wrapping up this deep dive into Leviticus 15, we've seen just how incredibly detailed these rules were, how uncleanness was thought to transfer, what objects were affected differently, the steps for purification, washing, waiting, those specific offerings.
Yeah, and stepping back, what's really striking is how these ancient texts reveal a worldview where, the physical body, its natural processes were just deeply woven into spiritual standing and the whole social order.
It wasn't just about health as we see it.
Not primarily, no. It was about maintaining a certain kind of purity, a ritual readiness that was seen as essential for the community's well-being and especially for their relationship with the sacred, with God dwelling among them.
Which brings us to a final thought for you, our listeners. Thinking about this ancient system where physical states had such profound ritual meaning, how do you see rules or ideas about physical states, whether it's health, hygiene, or maybe something else entirely shaping community identity or the relationship with the sacred in different cultures or times, maybe even today?
That's definitely something to chew on. How do we define purity or readiness in our own contexts, and what work do those definitions do?
Something to think about as you go about your day.